In the previous lesson, we introduced you to variables and how useful it was that we could actually contain some set of information and call back on it and use it within our JavaScript. So again, this is one of those fundamental building blocks of JavaScript. And understanding how to create and use variables in an effective manner will really help you accelerate your JavaScript learning experience. So essentially there are three main types of variables. We've got strings, numbers, and booleans. So I'm going to be going over what the differences are between those. So just opening up our source code, we see that we've been using variables before within our source code. And what we did over here is we set this var, we had a name for the variable, and we had this equal sign. So this is an assignment operator. And essentially this is setting my name equal to whatever is on the other side. But just like a mathematical formula where you have A equals whatever, B equals whatever, and having that equal sign makes them equivalent. And this is how we set variables. And we also notice that we have to start out and define the variable before we can use it. So if the variable wasn't defined within our script, then we weren't able to actually have access. So that's where we use that var. Within CodePen, they highlight it as blue characters, so we got var, my name equals, and we just left it blank. So any content between those double quotes would be the default variable. So if I put something like default or something like that in there, and I go back out to my source code, and if we always got to remember that we do need to refresh it. So if I click this, we see that we get whatever value has been assigned to that variable whenever we click. And remember again, over here, when we click button 3, we get that output, that console log output, because we want to make sure that our contents of my name actually contained that value. Now, there's a few things to remember when you are naming your variables. That for best practices, they should begin with a letter, and you can also begin them with an underscore. Actually, it should have been over here. We can also start them with a $sign. So this is commonly used jQuery. You're going to see the $signs used quite often. And there's a few characters that you can't start them with. So of course you can't start them with numbers. So we that immediately, because it's not being interpreted as the variable. Although we can place numbers anywhere after that for first character. So that most important part is wherever that first character is. And those are the three different ways that you can begin your first character of your variable. And then after that, of course, you then use numbers as well within your variable name. And generally, we see that writing variables as camel case, all that means is that we start with a lowercase for the first word and then an uppercase for subsequent words. So we have this one. There are naming conventions as well. So typically you want to name your variables something that really makes sense. And because this one's actually containing the name information from the prompt, this is why we called it my name. And we see that, so we start out with the lowercase, because essentially this is two words. So my, uppercase, because that's the second word. So we don't include spacing because that again will throw off the JavaScript. So that's a no-no within your JavaScript. And we can really do something simple, like we could just start with an A or something like that. So we can just as easily create a variable with A or any combination of words, letters, numbers, as long as we don't start with a number. Essentially, the name of the variable can be anything you want, as long as it really just common practice, good practice is to have it contain meaning, so that when you do have a whole bunch of variables, you don't maybe just have a bunch of A's, B's, C's, a whole bunch of letters that don't make sense. So you do want to make sure that does contain some meaning into it. You can also do the variables with single quotes or double quotes. So I could just as easily just single quote this as well, and it'll work the same way. See that those were just being added in. We have also the option of, if we've got a single quote that we also want to have apostrophe S or something like that, we see that what happens, it actually breaks out of the quotes. So we don't want that to happen. So we can backslash that just like we did with the new line break, where we did the backslash, and that gives us the ability to include a quote within a quoted object. Because usually as soon as you place the quote, it breaks the value up into two separate values. So this is an example of a string variable. Also, if we want to set a number variables, we're going to just set this as number and maybe just pick any number off the top of my head. So 4, one of my favorite numbers. And so this is how we set a number variable. And we also have what's called a Boolean. And the way the Booleans work, essentially you think of them as a switch, so they can be turned on or off. So they can be false or they can be true. They only contain two values. You can't preset numbers or anything. So it's either true or false. The value of Booleans is that a lot of times within JavaScript, if we're checking for conditions, which conditions are being met, then we just simply have to see if it's true or false, and that acts as a switch within the condition, and it allows us to continue and apply pieces of logic into our JavaScript. So they're very functional, although maybe initially you might be wondering, what's the point of the Boolean, because I can't really define what it's going to contain, but they are very functional and they are commonly used within JavaScript. Also, when you're doing declarations, we can declare multiple variables. So if I want to declare A, I want to declare, so maybe A is equal to A. I want to declare B is equal to B, of course, and so on. All we have to do is comma separate them, and we can have multiple values and comma separated, and this automatically will allow us to declare ABC without having to write VAR multiple times. So let's just go back into our source code, refresh it, and maybe we can console log it some of those values that we've created. So I'm going to console log out A. Let's see that A has a value of A, of course. There's also, and this undefined is just that return value. So this is just something that the console is including, so not to worry. You're probably wondering, what does that mean? So that's nothing to worry about right now, because we're not actually defining and returning anything, values in there. We're just asking for the console to output the value of A. And this is just what the console is returning, because we're not defining anything beyond the A. So of course, there was also my Boolean. And we can say that we have the value of truth. So that's how you set variables, and these are the fundamental core building blocks of JavaScript. So get to know them and get to understand the variables well, because you're going to be using them no matter what JavaScript you're writing. You're going to be using variables, and they're not as complicated as you would think, and it's really flexible what you can do, the things you can do, and how you can set up variables. So the next lesson, we're going to look at working with variables, different types of variables, introducing you to arrays, and allowing us to store multiple values within one variable. So we're going to expand upon these three basic variables and show you some additional types of storage units within JavaScript. So that's coming up in the next lesson.